The words hit Zora before she could brace for them. This is the most elaborate fiction I've seen passed off as economics research in 28 years. Mrs. Vance stood at the front of the classroom, Zora's bound project held between manicured fingers like something contaminated. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Westbridge Academy, catching dust motes that seemed to freeze in the sudden silence. 23 students stopped breathing at once. Zora's stomach dropped. She'd spent 3 months on that project, documenting every aspect of her mother's business with the precision her mother had taught her. Financial statements, distributor contracts, growth projections, customer testimonials, everything cited, everything verified. Miss Whitfield. Mrs. Vance's voice carried that particular tone, the one she used when she thought she was teaching a lesson about integrity. I want you to understand the seriousness of academic dishonesty. The ripping sound came next. Mrs. Vance tore the project in half, the binding cracking like a bone. The sound echoed off the walls, impossibly loud in the frozen classroom. She tore it again and again, methodical as someone shredding evidence. Pages scattered across the polished floor, months of work reduced to confetti. Zora's Bantu knot suddenly felt too tight, her thrifted blazer too heavy. She wanted to disappear into the Radiohead t-shirt underneath, wanted to melt into the floor with the torn pages of her mother's life's work. The red flags here are numerous. Mrs. Vance dropped the remaining chunks of paper onto her desk with a thump. First, a business of this supposed scale has no mainstream media coverage, not in Forbes, not in Bloomberg, not in any legitimate business publication I could find. She began counting on her fingers, her wedding ring catching the light. Second, the website looks homemade. No professional business of this magnitude would have such an amateur online presence. Third, these distribution claims seem wildly inflated. Target, Whole Foods, Ulta Beauty, without a single press release I can verify. Mrs. Vance shook her head slowly. And fourth, the founder apparently has no MBA, no formal business education whatsoever. Heat crawled up Zora's neck. Her hands gripped the edge of her desk. Mrs. Vance, my mother deliberately keeps a low media profile because, Miss Whitfield. The interruption was surgical. I'm not interested in excuses. Your mother's supposed business strategy is irrelevant to the fact that this project contains unverifiable claims. Zora tried again, her voice steadier than she felt. She built the business through grassroots marketing and community relationships. That's the whole point of the case study. It's about alternative growth models that don't rely on businesses like this. Real businesses appear in Forbes, in Bloomberg. Mrs. Vance crossed her arms. They don't just hide on Instagram with a few thousand followers and call themselves multi-state distributors. They have documentation, recognition, proof. The word proof landed like a slap. Torn pages drifted down onto Zora's desk, settling like confetti after a party she hadn't been invited to. She could see fragments of her mother's actual financial data, the real numbers from last quarter, revenue projections, profit margins, the distributor agreement with Target's Natural Products division, signed and notarized, all of it dismissed as elaborate fiction. One page landed face up, showing a photograph Zora had taken in her mother's lab. Imani Whitfield in her element, colorful head wrap bright against the white walls, surrounded by bottles and beakers, her hands mixing shea butter and botanical oils with the precision of someone who'd been doing this for 15 years. The caption read, Celestial Glow, Botanicals founder and CEO formulating new product line, 2024. Mrs. Vance saw where Zora was looking. Anyone can stage a photograph, Miss Whitfield. Anyone can create a website and print false documents. Around the classroom, faces stared. Marcus Chen looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting away when Zora glanced his direction. Sarah Williams bit her lip, sympathy clear in her expression, but her mouth staying carefully closed. Even Keisha Braxton, Zora's best friend since 6th grade, sat frozen in her seat 3 rows back, her box braids falling forward as she stared at her desk. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence felt like drowning. Zora's face burned, not just her cheeks but her whole face, her ears, down her neck, the kind of heat that comes from humiliation so complete it feels like being erased. She was the girl who'd invented a business empire, the girl whose mother wasn't real, the girl who thought she could fool a teacher with 28 years of experience. Mrs. Vance walked to her desk and picked up a pink referral form, her pen moving in decisive strokes. I'm referring this to administration for academic dishonesty. Principal Alcott will contact your parents and will have a disciplinary hearing to determine appropriate consequences. She signed the form with a flourish. Plagiarism and fabrication are expulsion-level offenses at Westbridge Academy. Expulsion. The word hung in the air like smoke. Gather your things, Miss Whitfield. Mrs. Vance held out the referral. You're to report to the principal's office immediately. Zora stood on legs that felt disconnected from her body. She bent to collect the torn pages scattered around her desk, but Mrs. Vance's voice stopped her. Leave them. Evidence of the scope of the fabrication. So Zora walked to the front of the classroom empty-handed, past 23 pairs of eyes that wouldn't meet hers. She took the pink slip from Mrs. Vance's outstretched hand, the paper crisp and official. Behind her, torn pages covered her desk like snow, each piece containing fragments of her mother's truth, dismissed as lies. The Whitfield home sat on Maple Street in the old part of town, where mature oak trees shaded modest three-bedroom houses with chain-link fences and flower boxes. Imani could have moved them anywhere after the third year of seven-figure revenue, but she'd chosen to stay. Close to her first customers, close to the community that supported her when banks wouldn't, close to who she'd been when she started mixing shea butter and essential oils on her kitchen counter at 2 a.m. Zora stood in the doorway of what used to be the guest bedroom, watching her mother work. Imani's laboratory smelled like heaven, and science had a baby. Lavender and rosehip oil mixing with the sharp tang of preservatives, the earthy weight of bentonite clay. Glass beakers caught afternoon light on stainless steel shelves. Botanical ingredients lined the walls in amber bottles with handwritten labels. Kukui nut oil, tamanu, sea buckthorn. A centrifuge hummed on the counter next to pH strips and a digital scale accurate to 0.01 grams. Mom, can I ask you some questions for my economics project? Zora held up her phone, recording app ready. Imani looked up from the emulsion she was whisking, protective goggles pushed up into her locks. Hit me, baby. Revenue for the last fiscal year? 4.2 million. Imani said it like she was reporting the weather, up 18% from the previous year. Zora's thumbs flew across her phone screen, taking notes. How many employees? 32 full-time, another 15 part-time and seasonal. That includes formulation team, production, shipping, customer service, and sales reps. Distribution partnerships? 63 independent retailers across 8 states, 4 regional chains, and our direct-to-consumer site, which is actually our biggest revenue stream. Imani returned to her whisking, the motion steady and practiced. We're in talks with a national beauty retailer, but I'm not sure I want that exposure. Zora lowered her phone. Why not? That's huge. Imani set down her whisk and pulled off her gloves. She gestured for Zora to sit on the stool by the window. Come here, let me explain something about staying small on purpose. They sat knee to knee in the converted bedroom laboratory, surrounded by the evidence of Imani's empire. When you get big headlines, you get big buyout offers, Imani said, and big scrutiny. Corporations start circling, wanting to acquire you, to scale you, to take what you built and turn it into something that fits their model. I built this to stay independent, to control my own formulations, my own pricing, my own values. The minute I'm on magazine covers, I'm a target. But don't you want people to know what you've accomplished? The people who need to know, our customers know, our retailers know, our bank knows. Imani smiled, but something sad lived in it. The rest of the world doesn't need to validate what's real. That evening, the Whitfield family sat around their dinner table, the same scratched oak table Imani had inherited from her grandmother. Terrence, Zora's father, served baked chicken and roasted vegetables while Zora explained her project assignment. We have to do a case study on a real business, Zora said, spearing a carrot. Analyze the business model, revenue streams, growth strategy, challenges. I asked Mrs. Vance if I could study Celestial Glow, and she said local businesses were perfect examples. Terrence, who spent his days as a guidance counselor at the public high school across town, set down his fork. Are you going to tell the whole truth? The loan denials? The retailers who wouldn't meet with your mother because they assumed she was the assistant, not the owner? Terrence, Imani warned. No, I'm serious. He looked at his daughter with the same direct gaze he used with students who needed to hear hard truths. If you're doing this project, tell the whole truth. Don't sanitize it to make people comfortable. That's how we end up invisible. Zora nodded slowly. I want to show the real numbers, the real growth, everything. Over the next 4 days, Zora documented her mother's business with the thoroughness of an investigative journalist. She drove with Imani to the warehouse facility on the industrial side of town, a 10,000-square-foot space where production happened. She photographed the filling stations where workers in hairnets and gloves pumped moisturizer into amber glass jars. She interviewed Marcus Chen, the operations manager, who walked her through inventory systems and shipping protocols. We process between 800 and 1,200 orders a week, Marcus explained, showing her the conveyor system. Peak season, we're hitting 2,000. She sat in Imani's home office reviewing actual financial statements, her phone camera capturing balance sheets and profit-loss reports. The numbers were staggering, revenue curves that climbed year over year, profit margins that would make any business school professor nod with approval, assets, inventory, accounts receivable, all documented with the precision of a company preparing for audit. On the 5th evening, Zora was formatting her bibliography when Imani appeared in her doorway with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. You almost done? Imani handed her daughter a mug. Just finishing citations. Zora gestured at her laptop screen, where she'd embedded photos of the warehouse, screenshots of the company website, graphs of revenue growth. I've got everything documented. Financial statements, interviews, photos, your business registration, tax returns, everything. Imani sat on the edge of Zora's bed, cradling her tea. Baby, I need you to understand something. Some people won't believe it. Zora looked up from her laptop. What do you mean? I have proof. They'll think success this big has to look a certain way, come from a certain background. They'll think it needs to be in magazines or newspapers to be real. They'll see a black woman running a multi-million-dollar company from a regular house in a regular neighborhood, and their brains won't compute it. Then they need better economics education. Imani's laugh was soft and sad. She reached out and tucked one of Zora's Bantu knots behind her ear. Baby, that's exactly the problem. Zora returned to her laptop, reading through her introduction one more time. She'd titled it Celestial Glow Botanicals, a case study in bootstrap growth and strategic independence. Every fact was verified. Every number was accurate. Every photograph was authentic. She hit print and listened to the pages emerge from the printer, warm and crisp. 23 pages of truth, ready to be graded. Dr. Alcott's office smelled like old books and lemon furniture polish, the kind of institutional scent that made serious conversations feel even heavier. The principal sat behind his mahogany desk, fingers steepled beneath his chin, while Mrs. Vance occupied the leather chair to his right, her posture rigid with certainty. Zora sat across from them, her backpack at her feet, that blue folder in her lap feeling both substantial and fragile. Zora, Dr. Alcott began, his voice measured, Mrs. Vance has expressed concerns about the authenticity of your sources. I'd like you to walk us through your documentation. Zora opened the folder, her hands steady despite the tightness in her chest. She'd organized everything with tabs, color-coded sections, the same meticulous approach her mother used for quarterly reports. I have the business registration with the Secretary of State, she said, sliding the first document across the desk. Filed 6 years ago when my mom transitioned from sole proprietorship to LLC. Dr. Alcott examined the document, noting the official seal, the registration number, the signatures. He passed it to Mrs. Vance, who barely glanced at it before setting it aside. LLC formation documents, Zora continued, adding another page. Articles of organization, operating agreement, initial member contributions. She laid out each page like evidence in a trial, which is exactly what this felt like. Trademark registrations for Celestial Glow Botanicals and 3 product line names, all filed with the USPTO. Mrs. Vance leaned forward, her expression unchanged. Anyone can file paperwork, Zora. These documents prove someone registered a business, yes. But where's the proof of actual revenue, actual operations? You claimed in your project that this company generates millions in annual sales. Show me that. Zora reached for her laptop, the one she'd loaded with screenshots and analytics reports. Her fingers found the trackpad, navigating to the folder labeled Project Evidence. She turned the screen toward them. Website analytics from the past 6 months, 47,000 monthly visitors, average session duration of 4 minutes, 23 seconds. Here's the traffic sources breakdown: 60% organic search, 25% direct, 15% social media referrals. She clicked to another tab. Verified customer reviews on 3 independent platforms, 4.8-star average across 2,300 reviews. Wholesale partnership announcements with regional distributors. Here's the press release from Natural Beauty Collective. Here's the one from Essence Botanicals Network. Dr. Alcott leaned closer, studying the numbers, the graphs showing steady upward trends. But Mrs. Vance's expression had hardened into something that looked almost like satisfaction, as if each piece of evidence Zora presented only confirmed what she already believed. Websites can be fabricated, Mrs. Vance said, her tone patient in a way that made Zora's jaw clench. Numbers can be invented. Review sites can be manipulated. I've seen students create incredibly convincing fake websites for projects before. You're clearly talented with technology, but that doesn't make this real. She turned to Dr. Alcott. I need third-party verification, independent confirmation from an institution that has no connection to the family. Zora felt something cold settle in her stomach, her mother's warning echoing in her head. Some people won't believe it. She watched Mrs. Vance pull out her phone, watched her open Zora's project document on Dr. Alcott's computer, watched her scan through the pages until she found what she was looking for. Here, Mrs. Vance said, pointing at the screen. In your case study, you mentioned an expansion loan application with Hammond and Sterling Bank. If this business is as successful as you claim, the bank would have records. They would have verified all of this information themselves. Mrs. Vance, Dr. Alcott said carefully, I'm not sure calling the bank is. It's the most straightforward verification available. She was already dialing, her phone pressed to her ear. If the business is real, they'll confirm it. If it's not, we'll know immediately. The phone rang on speaker. Mrs. Vance had insisted to prove her point to everyone present. A receptionist answered, cheerful and professional. Mrs. Vance asked for commercial lending, was transferred, waited through hold music that sounded tinny through the phone's small speaker. Garrett Feldman, commercial lending. How can I help you? The voice was smooth, authoritative, the kind that expected to be trusted. Mrs. Vance introduced herself, explained she was verifying information for a student project, mentioned Celestial Glow Botanicals. I have no record of a business by that name in our portfolio, Feldman said, without even a pause to check. The certainty in his voice made Zora's hands curl into fists. Because you denied the application, Zora said, her voice cutting through the office. 6 months ago, my mother applied for expansion capital and you denied it. The silence on the other end stretched too long, loaded with something Zora couldn't quite name. When Feldman spoke again, his voice had shifted, become more formal, more distant. I'm not at liberty to discuss declined applications, he said carefully. But if we declined, there were sound financial reasons. We conduct thorough due diligence on every application. Our standards are quite rigorous. Mrs. Vance's smile was small and grim. Thank you, Mr. Feldman. That's all I needed to know. She ended the call and turned to Dr. Alcott, that expression of vindication settling across her features. There's your proof. This family is misrepresenting their circumstances. Either the business doesn't exist as described or it was deemed financially unsound by professional lending officers. Either way, this project is based on false premises. Zora opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to defend, but Dr. Alcott raised a hand. His expression was troubled, his eyes moving between Zora and Mrs. Vance, calculating something Zora couldn't read. I need to investigate this further, he said slowly. Zora, I'm going to have to suspend you from Mrs. Vance's class pending resolution. Go home. I'll be in touch with your parents. The words felt like a door closing, like all that documentation spread across the desk meant nothing at all. The compliance alert pinged at 2:47 p.m., a small red notification in the corner of Lydia Tran's second monitor. She'd been reviewing quarterly lending metrics when the system flagged it. Unauthorized file access. Declined application accessed without client authorization or business purpose. She sighed, expecting another loan officer checking an old file for a reference call. It happened sometimes, usually innocent. Usually. She pulled the access log, her practiced fingers navigating the bank's internal systems with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 17 years in audit compliance. The file name appeared. Celestial Glow Botanicals, LLC, accessed by G. Feldman. Timestamp, 2:31 p.m. Purpose code, blank. Authorization, none. Lydia frowned. Garrett Feldman was too experienced to leave the purpose code blank. She opened the file itself, scanning the denial letter he'd written 6 months earlier. The language was formal, almost template-like. Unproven market segment, limited collateral relative to requested amount, insufficient management experience in scaling operations. The reasoning seemed standard enough, the kind of prudent risk assessment that protected the bank's portfolio. Then she pulled the actual application. The numbers made her sit back in her chair. Celestial Glow Botanicals, annual revenue, $4.2 million, profit margin, 18%, 3 consecutive years of growth, each year exceeding projections, 0 outstanding debt. The business plan was detailed, professional, included market research and distribution contracts with major retailers. The owner, Imani Whitfield, had 15 years of formulation experience and an MBA from Howard University. Lydia read the application twice, then looked at Feldman's denial reasoning again. The disconnect made her stomach tighten. This wasn't an unproven market. This wasn't insufficient experience. This was a thriving business with documented success, seeking capital to expand into established distribution channels. She pulled Feldman's other approvals from the same quarter, cross-referencing the applications he'd deemed worthy of funding. A craft brewery with 8 months of operation and projected revenue of $1.1 million. Approved for $300,000. A consulting firm with 2 years of history, revenue just under $2 million, existing debt at 32% of gross. Approved for $250,000. A landscaping company with fluctuating seasonal revenue and no growth trajectory. Approved for $175,000. Every single one had weaker financials than Celestial Glow. Every single one presented higher risk by traditional lending metrics. And every single owner was white. She'd seen their photos in the application files, the way the system automatically pulled LinkedIn profiles for verification. Lydia's hands felt cold. She expanded the search parameters, pulling 3 years of Feldman's lending decisions. The database compiled slowly, processing hundreds of applications. She sorted by approval status, then by demographic data the bank was required to collect for fair lending compliance. The pattern emerged like a stain spreading across clean fabric. Black-owned businesses, 73% denial rate. White-owned businesses in the same revenue categories, 22% denial rate. The disparity was so stark it seemed impossible, the kind of statistical anomaly that couldn't happen by accident. She drilled deeper, examining the approved applications for white-owned businesses. Lower revenue, higher debt ratios, less operational history. Some had been in business less than a year. Some had negative cash flow in their most recent quarter. Lydia's hands were shaking now as she compiled the comparison report. She created a spreadsheet side by side. Approved white-owned business with $1.3 million in revenue and 40% debt load, next to denied black-owned business with $3.8 million in revenue and 15% debt load. Approved white-owned startup with 6 months of operation, next to denied black-owned business with 5 years of growth. The pattern repeated across dozens of applications, undeniable and systematic. This wasn't about risk assessment. This wasn't about prudent lending standards. This was discrimination, pure and methodical, hidden behind the language of financial analysis. She thought about Imani Whitfield, reading that denial letter. Insufficient management experience. The woman had an MBA and 15 years building a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. What experience could possibly be sufficient if that wasn't enough? Lydia pulled up the red flag memo template, her fingers moving quickly now. She'd worked in compliance long enough to know what this meant. Fair lending violations, federal investigation, the kind of liability that could cost the bank millions and destroy careers. She typed, "Potential fair lending violation requiring immediate investigation. Pattern of systematic discrimination in commercial lending decisions. Urgent executive review recommended." She attached the comparison report, the statistical analysis, the side-by-side examples. Then she sent it directly to Marcus Webb, the regional director. His office was 2 floors up, Corner suite with windows overlooking the financial district. He'd been with Hammond and Sterling for 32 years, had a reputation for taking compliance seriously. If anyone would act on this, it would be Marcus. Her phone rang 4 minutes later. Marcus's voice was tight, controlled. "I'm looking at your report. Tell me this is a data error." "I've verified everything twice," Lydia said. "The pattern is consistent across 3 years, 73% versus 22%. The approved applications for white-owned businesses show significantly weaker financials than the denied applications for black-owned businesses." She heard paper rustling, could picture Marcus flipping through the printed report. The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. "Why did he access this particular file today?" Marcus finally asked. "The log shows an external inquiry. Someone called asking about the business. He pulled the file to respond." "Who called?" "I don't have that information yet, but the access was unauthorized. He had no business purpose for opening a declined application without client consent." More silence. Then Marcus's voice came back, harder now, decisive. "Get me every file, every application he's touched in the past 5 years. I want approval rates, demographic breakdowns, comparative financials, and find out who called today and why." "Already compiling," Lydia said. "Call the school," Marcus said, and she could hear him moving now, could picture him standing, reaching for his jacket. "We're going there personally, and bring Feldman. He's going to explain this in person." The auditorium smelled like floor wax and nervous anticipation. Parents filled the rows of seats, their phones out to photograph their children's projects, while students clustered near the displays arranged along the perimeter walls. Poster boards showcased supply and demand curves, market analysis charts, business model breakdowns. The buzz of conversation had that particular quality of a school event where everyone was performing interest they didn't quite feel. Zora sat in the third row, her backpack heavy against her shins. Inside it, the torn pages of her project pressed against her textbooks. She'd considered taping them back together, but what would be the point? The empty space where her display should have been told its own story. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "Leaving now. Supplier ran late. Be there in 20. Stay strong, baby. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. Mrs. Vance stood at the podium, adjusting the microphone. She wore a navy blazer over a cream blouse, her hair sprayed into submission. The overhead lights caught the edges of her reading glasses as she surveyed the crowd. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our annual economics showcase." Her voice carried that practiced warmth teachers used for parent events. "Tonight, we celebrate the hard work our students have put into understanding real-world business principles. But before we begin our presentations, I need to address something important." The room quieted. Parents looked up from their phones. "Academic integrity is the foundation of everything we do here at Westbridge." Mrs. Vance paused, letting the words settle. "Our standards are high because we believe in preparing students for college, for careers, for lives built on truth and verified information. Sometimes that means having difficult conversations about the difference between aspiration and reality, between what we wish were true and what we can actually document." Zora's stomach twisted. She could feel eyes turning toward her, students who knew, who'd heard the rumors. "Miss Whitfield, would you come to the front, please?" The walk to the podium felt endless. Zora's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor. She passed Keisha in the fourth row, saw her friend's hand reach out as if to stop her, then fall back. When she reached the microphone, she had to adjust it down. Mrs. Vance stood beside her, close enough that Zora could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive. "Miss Whitfield has something to say about her project submission." Mrs. Vance's smile was thin, expectant. Zora looked out at the sea of faces, parents she didn't know, students from other classes, Mr. Patterson, the history teacher, standing near the back with his arms crossed. She thought about her mother stuck in traffic, her phone probably gripped tight against the steering wheel. She thought about the warehouse, the production floor, the wall of awards her mother never talked about because she was too busy building the next thing. "You understand now that your project contained unverified claims?" Mrs. Vance prompted, her voice gentle, coaxing. Zora's voice came out quieter than she intended, but clear. "No, ma'am, every claim in my project is true." The gasp rippled through the audience like wind through grass. Mrs. Vance's face flushed, 2 spots of color appearing high on her cheeks. "We've been over this, Miss Whitfield. The bank confirmed they denied my mother's loan." Zora turned to look at her teacher directly. "That doesn't mean her business doesn't exist. It means they didn't give her the money she asked for. Those are 2 different things." "Zora, you're making this worse for yourself." "I've been to her mom's warehouse." Keisha's voice rang out from the audience. She was standing now, her box braids swinging as she turned to address the room. "I've seen the production floor, the shipping department, the—" "Sit down, Miss Braxton." Mrs. Vance's voice cracked like a whip. "Or you'll be removed from this assembly. You're calling her a liar because you don't believe a black woman could—" "Security!" Mrs. Vance's hand shot up, gesturing to the 2 uniformed officers stationed near the doors. "Please escort Miss Braxton out." Keisha kept talking as they approached her row, parents shifting uncomfortably in their seats to let them pass. "You don't want to hear the truth because it doesn't match what you think." The officers took her arms, not roughly but firmly, and guided her toward the exit. Her voice carried even as the doors closed behind her. The murmur that followed was different now, uncomfortable, questioning. Parents exchanged glances. A woman in the second row whispered something to her husband. Mrs. Vance turned back to Zora, her composure cracking at the edges. "Last chance, Miss Whitfield. Apologize for misrepresenting your sources or you're expelled. Do you understand what that means? Your transcript, your college applications, your future?" Zora felt the tears building behind her eyes, hot and insistent. She blinked them back, but 2 escaped anyway, tracking down her cheeks. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. "My mother didn't raise me to apologize for telling the truth, especially when it's inconvenient for people who don't want to believe it." The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Vance opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her hand reached toward Zora's arm, then stopped mid-air. The auditorium doors swung open with a bang that made everyone jump. Dr. Alcott entered first, his expression grave and purposeful. Behind him came 2 people in business suits, a woman with sharp eyes carrying a leather portfolio, a man with silver temples and the bearing of someone used to corner offices. Then Garrett Feldman, his face pale and gleaming with sweat, his expensive tie slightly askew. And finally, Imani Whitfield, her locks wrapped in gold fabric, her presence filling the doorway. Beside her walked a woman in a tailored pantsuit carrying a briefcase stamped with a law firm's name. Every eye in the auditorium turned toward them. Dr. Alcott's voice cut through the lingering silence with the authority of someone who'd spent 3 decades navigating institutional minefields. "Mrs. Vance, we need to pause the program. Hammond and Sterling Bank has urgent information regarding the Whitfield matter." The murmur that rippled through the auditorium carried a different quality now, anticipation mixed with confusion. Parents shifted in their seats. A few pulled out phones, then thought better of it, putting them away. Marcus Webb stepped forward, and the room seemed to recalibrate around his presence. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of bearing that came from years of corner offices and boardroom decisions. His suit probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. When he spoke, his voice carried without effort, trained to command attention in rooms full of people used to being heard. "I'm Marcus Webb, Regional Director for Hammond and Sterling Bank. I'm here because my institution was contacted today to verify information about a student's project. That contact triggered a compliance review." Zora felt her mother's hand find her shoulder, warm and steady. She could smell the familiar scent of shea butter and lavender oil that always clung to her mother's skin, the smell of home and safety and truth. Webb pulled a tablet from his portfolio, tapped it twice, and the screen behind Mrs. Vance flickered to life. Numbers appeared, spreadsheets with highlighted rows, data that meant nothing to most people in the room, but everything to those who understood what they were seeing. "Mr. Feldman here has been a loan officer for 23 years. In the past 3 years, he's denied 73% of applications from black-owned businesses while approving 78% from white-owned businesses in comparable financial positions." The reaction was immediate. Someone gasped. A woman in the 3rd row said, "Oh my God," just loud enough to carry. A man stood up, then sat back down. The murmur grew louder, uncomfortable, the sound of people confronting something they'd preferred not to see. Feldman's face had gone from pale to red, a flush creeping up his neck. "Now, wait just a minute. I can explain." Webb didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone made Feldman's words die in his throat. You'll have opportunity to explain to federal regulators. Right now, these parents deserve to understand what happened here. He tapped his tablet again. New information appeared on the screen, and Zora recognized it immediately. Her project. Her mother's business. The loan application she'd found in the filing cabinet at home, the one with denied stamped across it in red ink. Celestial Glow Botanicals applied for a $500,000 expansion loan 6 months ago. Annual revenue, $4.2 million. Profit margin, 18%. Operational history, 7 years. Debt, 0. Mr. Feldman denied this application. Zora watched her teacher's face as the numbers appeared on screen. Mrs. Vance had gone very still, her perfectly pressed collar suddenly looking too tight around her neck. Webb's next tap brought up handwritten notes projected large enough for everyone to read. Feldman's handwriting, precise and damning. Unclear market sustainability. Founder lacks traditional credentials. Risk profile too high. The same week, Webb continued, his voice carrying the weight of documented fact, Mr. Feldman approved 3 loans to white-owned businesses with lower revenue, higher debt, and less operational history. More data appeared. Side-by-side comparisons, numbers that couldn't be argued with, patterns that couldn't be explained away. A bakery with 2 years of operation and $180,000 in existing debt. Approved. A landscaping company with declining revenue and no business plan. Approved. A consulting firm run by someone with an MBA but no clients. Approved. Imani stepped forward, her gold head wrap catching the auditorium lights. Her attorney handed Dr. Alcott a leather folder, the kind that whispered expensive and official and undeniable. When Imani spoke, her voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone who'd learned to present facts in rooms full of people looking for reasons to doubt her. Certified financial statements, audited by Morrison & Chen, one of the top accounting firms in the state, business registration, trademark documentation, wholesale contracts with Whole Foods, Target, and Ulta Beauty. Distribution partnership with Regional Natural Foods Cooperative, serving 14 states. She pulled more documents from the folder as she spoke, each one landing on the table in front of Dr. Alcott with a soft thump that seemed to echo in the silent room. Tax returns, bank statements, contracts with signatures and corporate seals, letters of credit, shipping manifests, the physical weight of proof. Imani turned and her eyes found Mrs. Vance across the stage. The teacher had been reaching for the documents, her hand hovering over them like she was afraid they might burn her. My daughter told the truth, every word. Mrs. Vance's hand dropped. She stared at the documents, at the numbers, at the undeniable evidence of everything she'd called fake. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking older, smaller, diminished. Feldman found his voice again, desperation making it sharp. I made business decisions based on discriminatory bias. Webb's interruption was surgical, precise. The federal regulators will be reviewing your entire portfolio. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency takes fair lending violations very seriously, Mr. Feldman. You'll be hearing from them within 48 hours. Feldman opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. His expensive tie had gone crooked, his slicked back hair falling forward. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. The silence that followed felt different from all the silences before. This one carried weight, understanding, the uncomfortable recognition of truth that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Mrs. Vance cleared her throat. The sound was small, uncertain, nothing like her usual classroom authority. I need to... She stopped, started again. May I speak? Every eye in the auditorium turned toward her. Mrs. Vance approached the microphone with steps that seemed to cost her something. Her hands shook as she gripped the podium, knuckles white against the dark wood. The auditorium had gone silent in a way that felt different from before. This wasn't the silence of shock or scandal, but of collective breath-holding, waiting to see if truth would actually be spoken. Zora. Mrs. Whitfield. Her voice cracked on the first syllable. She cleared her throat, tried again. I owe you an apology that I cannot adequately express. Zora sat perfectly still in her chair, her mother's hand resting on her shoulder. She didn't nod, didn't encourage, just waited. Mrs. Vance turned from them to face the full assembly, parents and students and faculty, all watching. I convinced myself I was protecting academic standards. I told myself I was teaching critical thinking. Her fingers tightened on the microphone. I told myself I was doing my job when I questioned Zora's research, when I demanded more proof, when I called her project fabricated. Someone in the audience shifted. A chair creaked. The sound carried in the stillness. The truth is, I couldn't imagine a black woman building an empire like this because I've never been taught to imagine it. The words came faster now, like she was afraid she'd lose courage if she slowed down. Every business case study I've taught for 28 years has featured the same kinds of founders, the same kinds of success stories. Silicon Valley, Wall Street, names everyone recognizes. She paused, her voice dropping. And instead of questioning my own assumptions, instead of examining my curriculum or my expectations, I questioned a child's integrity. Zora felt her mother's hand tighten slightly on her shoulder. Not restraining, supporting. Mrs. Vance turned back to them, and there were tears on her face now, not performed but real, the kind that made her mascara run. You were right to refuse to apologize. Your mother did raise you correctly, to stand in your truth even when institutions try to make you doubt it. She looked directly at Zora. I tried to make you doubt yourself. I tried to make you smaller. I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air. Zora could feel everyone waiting for her response, for absolution, for the moment when the black girl forgives and everything gets tied up neat. But her mother stood, and when Imani Whitfield spoke, her voice carried the weight of every dismissal she'd ever faced, every loan application marked risky, every meeting where someone assumed she was the assistant and not the CEO. I appreciate your apology, Mrs. Vance. Imani's tone was gracious but firm, the voice she used in boardrooms when someone tried to lowball her contracts. But apologies aren't enough. Systems have to change. She turned to Dr. Alcott, who still stood near the stage looking like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. How many other students have been dismissed because their family success stories didn't match their teachers' expectations? How many have apologized when they shouldn't have? How many just stopped talking about what their parents built because it was easier than fighting to be believed? Dr. Alcott removed his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt even though they weren't dirty. When he put them back on, he looked directly at Imani. You're right. This is a curriculum failure and a training failure. We will address both. He glanced at the assembled faculty. Starting with mandatory implicit bias training for all staff, a complete audit of our business and economics curriculum, and a student advisory committee to review materials for representation gaps. He paused. That's a beginning, not a solution. Marcus Webb stepped forward, his suit jacket still perfectly pressed despite everything. Hammond and Sterling will be implementing new oversight protocols, bias audits for all lending officers, and a community advisory board for commercial lending decisions. He pulled out his phone, held it up. I'm scheduling the first meeting before I leave this building. Then he turned to Feldman, who'd been standing frozen near the wall like maybe everyone had forgotten he was there. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Our legal team will cooperate fully with federal investigators. Webb nodded to the two security officers who'd been waiting by the door. Please escort Mr. Feldman from the premises. Feldman's face had gone gray. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked around the auditorium like someone might defend him, might say this was all excessive. No one spoke. The security officers moved to either side of him, not touching but present, and he walked between them toward the exit. His expensive shoes clicked against the floor. Someone coughed. A parent whispered something to their child. Feldman disappeared through the double doors, and the sound of them closing echoed through the space. It should have felt triumphant. It just felt heavy. Imani knelt beside Zora's chair, her head wrap brilliant purple in the stage lights, her hands cupping her daughter's face. I'm proud of you. You didn't flinch. Zora felt something break open in her chest, the tension she'd been holding for days. I learned from you, Mama. Zora! Keisha's voice carried from the auditorium entrance. Dr. Alcott nodded to the teacher monitoring the door, and Keisha ran down the aisle, her box braids flying. The two girls crashed into each other, arms tight, Keisha whispering, I knew it. I knew you were telling the truth, over and over. Around them, the assembly was shifting. Several black parents had stood, were making their way toward Imani. A woman in a Navy business suit reached them first. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm Denise Crawford. I own 3 hair salons." She glanced at where Feldman had been. "Hammond and Sterling denied my expansion loan last year, told me my business model wasn't sustainable." Marcus Chen, an Asian man in his 40s, stepped forward. "Restaurant owner, also denied. They suggested I apply for a smaller amount." Jamal Thompson, construction company. Rosa Martinez, catering business. They kept coming, a line of entrepreneurs whose stories had been dismissed, whose numbers had been questioned, whose dreams had been called risky by men like Feldman, who never bothered to look past their assumptions. Imani listened to each one, her attorney taking notes, and the assembly transformed into something else entirely. Not a showcase, a reckoning. A community finally naming what had been done to them, finally seeing the pattern instead of blaming themselves. 3 months later, Zora stood in front of a different classroom, holding a new version of her project. The district training room was larger than Zora expected, with rows of economics teachers from 12 different schools filling the seats. She stood at the front, her revised project displayed on the screen behind her, and felt the weight of 3 months compressed into this single presentation. "My original project was about my mother's business, Celestial Glow Botanicals," she began, her voice steady. "But what I'm presenting today is about what happened when I tried to tell that story." She clicked to the next slide. It showed Mrs. Vance's original comments in red ink. "Citation needed. Verify claims. Implausible." This is a case study in institutional bias, how it operates, how it disguises itself as standards and skepticism, how it makes you question documented reality because it doesn't match assumptions about who gets to be successful. In the third row, Mrs. Vance sat with a yellow notepad, writing furiously. She'd volunteered to attend, had requested to be here. Her hair was different now, pulled back simply, and she wore a button on her blazer. Equity in education. Zora walked them through the timeline, the accusation, the dismissal of evidence, the call to the bank that triggered everything else. She showed them the audit report that revealed Garrett Feldman's pattern, the numbers that transformed individual cruelty into systemic discrimination. "The question isn't whether my mother's business was real," Zora said. "The question is why multiple adults with power assumed it wasn't. What made fabrication more believable than achievement?" Dr. Alcott stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, nodding. He'd spent the past 3 months rebuilding curriculum standards from the ground up. Every teacher in the district now completed 40 hours of implicit bias training. Every syllabus underwent equity review. Every case study assignment required diverse business models, not as special units but as standard examples. "We're teaching students to recognize Black-owned businesses, immigrant-owned businesses, women-owned businesses as normal parts of the economic landscape," one teacher said during the discussion period. "Not exceptional, not unlikely, just real." The new standards were explicit. Students researched businesses without mainstream media coverage. They analyzed lending patterns and approval rates across demographics. They studied success that existed outside traditional venture capital narratives, beyond Silicon Valley mythology. Mrs. Vance raised her hand. "I want to add something." Her voice was quieter than Zora remembered, less certain of its authority. "I've been teaching economics for 28 years. I thought I was teaching critical thinking. I was actually teaching students to question success that didn't look like what I expected success to look like. That's not rigor. That's bias disguised as standards." She looked directly at Zora. "I'm grateful for the chance to do better, to teach better." At Hammond and Sterling Bank, the changes ran deeper than policy. Lydia Tran sat in her new office, Vice President of Fair Lending Compliance printed on the door plaque. Her audit process had become the model, adopted by 3 other regional banks. Quarterly lending pattern reviews, diverse committees for applications over $50,000, real-time flagging of approval disparities. The federal investigation of Garrett Feldman had revealed the full scope. $2.3 million in denied loans to qualified minority-owned businesses over 6 years. Applications with better financials than approved white-owned businesses, rejected for reasons that dissolved under scrutiny. The bank created a restitution fund, reaching out to every denied applicant with an invitation to reapply under new review standards. Celestial Glow Botanicals received its expansion loan from Pinnacle Community Bank, a woman-owned institution that understood growth when they saw it. The second production facility opened in April, 62 employees now, distribution expanding into 8 states. Imani hired 3 of the entrepreneurs who'd been denied by Feldman. She gave them jobs, yes, but also mentorship, connections, proof that someone believed in their capacity. Keisha had started Students Documenting Institutional Bias, an organization that spread to 4 schools. They recorded incidents, analyzed patterns, presented findings to administration. They were learning to see the systems, not just the moments. Zora had spoken at 7 schools in 3 months. Each time she told the story. Each time students came up afterward with their own stories of being questioned, dismissed, told their truth was implausible. Now she sat in her kitchen at home, the same kitchen where it all started. Imani stood at the counter mixing a new formulation, shea butter and jojoba oil, and something that smelled like lavender and rain. Zora watched her mother's hands, the practiced precision, the knowledge built over decades. "Come here," Imani said. "I want to teach you this one." Zora moved beside her, and her mother guided her hands through the process. Measuring, mixing, testing temperature and texture, the passing of knowledge, the building of legacy. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Zora said, her voice soft, then louder, addressing something beyond the kitchen, beyond this moment. "How many times have you dismissed someone's truth because it didn't match your expectations? How many times have you asked for proof that you wouldn't ask for from someone who looks like you?" She thought about Mrs. Vance's red pen, about Feldman's practiced smile, about every person in that assembly who'd been denied and blamed themselves instead of seeing the pattern. Bias doesn't announce itself. It hides in the questions we ask, the evidence we demand, the success we can't imagine believing. It sounds like standards. It feels like thoroughness. It presents as protecting integrity when it's actually protecting assumptions. Imani's hands covered hers, steadying the mixing bowl. The question is, what will you do when you see it? The kitchen smelled like shea butter and possibility. Behind them, Zora's restored project sat on the table, every citation verified, every number documented, every claim proven true. It had never needed validation. It had only needed recognition. Success that never required permission. A family that never needed approval. Truth that existed whether or not anyone chose to believe it. The question was never about them. It was always about everyone else.